Hi, AJ Hartley here, novelist, Shakespeare professor, fan of various aspects of Japanese music and culture, and in this case TV. And I'm going to be talking about a pre-pandemic show called Dr. Storks.
目の前で生まれようとする命があれば僕らは全力で助けます。
産婦人科医であり
1分で赤ちゃん出すよ。
はい。天才ピアニストコウノトリさくらと医療チームが導く奇跡の物語。金曜ドラマ「コウノドリ」10月16日スタート。
生まれてきておめでとう。
So the show came out in 2015. There are two seasons, 2015 and 2017. It was based on a manga originally called Kōnodori, Dr. Stork. Kōnodori is the Japanese word for stork, and it follows an OBGYN doctor, an obstetrics and gynecologist called Dr. Kōnodori. But it's very much an ensemble cast. It centers on him, and part of the quirk that makes him interesting is that he's also a kind of viral TikTok jazz pianist who goes by the name of Baby, and he's sort of in disguise. And so one of the first scenes in the show is that he's in the middle of a concert and he's paged and immediately has to run off to the hospital in the middle of the concert and drop what he's doing. And so there's a running gag about his sort of secret identity. I will say that there's only limited mileage for that in the show, and I think certainly by season 2 they've kind of abandoned it as having any kind of real plot significance, which I think is a good thing. And so it becomes simply a way of using the piano as the kind of emotional soundtrack for a lot of the main plot stuff. It's, each season is 10, 11 episodes, and like a lot of medical dramas, it focuses on a case or two. Sometimes they extend beyond the episode. Mostly they don't. They stay focused on that one episode, and it's a series of, days in the life of an obstetrics, gynecology and neonatology center of a regional hospital in Japan. And like a lot of medical dramas, it's about the core team, the people who work there, and the individual cases presented by the patients. The supporting cast is really, really strong. The main foil for Kōnodori himself is Dr. Shinomiya, who's played by Gen Hoshino, who, if you know other shows made by the same production network, such as MIU 404, you'll know is partnered with the same actor, Go Ayano, in that show as well. And there's some crossover between that show and Unnatural, which I reviewed before. You'll also know Gen Hoshino maybe from the Japanese music scene. He's the singer-songwriter of various hits, including Koi. The supporting cast includes Mayu Matsuoko as Shimoya, who's one of the most sort of empathetic of the characters, and Yo Yoshida as Rumiko Komatsu, the primary midwife. And the show is really strong, I think, in a number of ways that are Japan specific. And I always say this, these are not shows that simply happen to take place in Japan. They are in many ways profoundly about Japan. So if this is something that interests you, I strongly recommend the show. And they're about Japan in that a lot of the issues and ideas that come up in these episodes are, if not uniquely Japanese, then specifically Japanese in the individual manifestation. So there's a lot of concern with medical treatments and conditions and ideas and prejudices that are specifically Japanese. They show up in other cultures as well, but they take a specifically Japanese form. So, for example, attitudes to C-sections, There's an idea that mothers who don't deliver naturally and go through the pain of childbirth don't have as strong a bond with their child. And so there's a prejudice against C-sections, even in situations where the life of the mother or baby might be in danger. There's questions about gender issues and expectations in terms of child rearing, and the extent to which fathers are involved in the prenatal and birth process, and then questions of work and how fathers particularly, but also women, participate in the process of child rearing whilst trying to hold down a job or a career with, as is often the case in Japan, extremely heavy pressures in terms of work time and the problems generally of work-life balance, housing space, relationships with extended family, and so on. There are also the political and economic pressures of trying to sustain comparatively small hospitals in communities that are shrinking because of a stagnant birth rate. There are concerns about the practicalities and prejudices surrounding adoption and IVF, and the issues are surrounding choosing or not choosing to pursue a birth to term. In other words, dealing with questions of abortion, but also of questions of miscarriage and a sense of responsibility that parents carry, which is, takes specific Japanese forms in terms of how parents come to terms with the failure of a pregnancy. There's also concerns about questions of birth defects and the difficulties of raising children with some form of disability, and the pros and cons of dealing with that kind of thing in your life, along with the pressure that adds to existing concerns on things like childcare and relationships with extended family. But the other thing that I really like about the show is that one of the things that is specifically Japanese about it is its focus on community and on shared effort and support of both patients and colleagues. One of the things that happens with a lot of medical dramas in the West is that they become soap operas. They become they become one of two things. They either become soap operas, which are all about the main cast, the doctors and nurses, and what they're doing amongst themselves, much of which can be quite mean-spirited sometimes. And then the alternative is that they become puzzles in the tradition of a show like House, where the patients represent little more than case studies to demonstrate the genius of the medical staff. And this does neither of those two things. It focuses on patients, and it has this very Japanese investment in that sense of we are all in this together. There are repeated scenes of the doctors and the patients sort of bonding in this very Gambarimasho kind of spirit in terms of making the decisions for the mother and for the baby, and those sorts of pressure, and dealing with the pressures as a unit, with a sense of shared purpose for a common good. All that said about the positivity of the show, that doesn't mean that it's not, I was going to say dark, but that's not the word, occasionally tragic, It's upbeat because we're always looking for the positive, and we're looking for good things to come out of all cases. But the cases don't always go well. It's one of the things I like about the show. My wife is was a pediatrician for 30 years and has a lot to say about the accuracy of medical dramas. And she actually thinks that this is one of the most accurate that she's seen. It can be occasionally a little contrived in the way that a lot of these Japanese dramas are sometimes a little, they feel overly scripted and rely too much on coincidence and a kind of contrived structure. But this less than the majority. I really liked MIU 404, for instance, but there are times when the plots get overly convenient. And I recently watched something called Invisible, or tried to, and I could only get through an episode or two before I just couldn't believe in it. I couldn't believe in the characters, and I couldn't believe in the plotting. And sometimes this comes from being derived from manga, which is obviously a much more visual form than, say, a novel, which tends to be much more internal. And so sometimes characters get a little flat, and the story itself is overly driven by visuals. That's not the case with Dr. Storks. You know, one of the things that hangs over the story all the time is the possibility for things to go wrong, because they do it just often enough for you to know that it's always a possibility, that sometimes things go bad. And it's not, and when things do go bad, you always feel that it's not simply a way of disrupting the stars, the main characters, right? Again, this is something I sometimes feel with medical dramas in the West, that when something bad happens, it's not really about the patient. It's very quickly about the star of the show, who is the doctor or whatever. I don't feel that with this. I feel that when things happen, it's because they just happen, that the show owes a certain sense of obligation to reality. It is very much about the relationships of the doctors, but the doctors are characterized by differences in temperament and sometimes ideology, but not usually by a sense of their personalities getting in the way of their jobs. Occasionally that happens and has to be dealt with, but for the most part, you do believe that this is really a team who are trying to do the best for their patients. And it's therefore tender and kind and thoughtful. And the main character, Kōnodori, is characterized primarily by his kindness, by his generosity, by his optimism, which doesn't always work and sometimes puts him at odds with some of the rest of the team who think that his positivity can sometimes be a hindrance to good decision making. You know, I should say that I don't come to this as an unbiased audience member. I said my wife was a pediatrician, so I've been hearing, stories from the NICU, from the newborn intensive care unit for 30 years. So the show maybe resonates with me more than it might do for you. I don't know. The other thing is that I'm not sure how much I'm going to say about this, but my own son was born at 28 weeks gestation, which means he was 3 months early, and at the time that meant 30% mortality rate. And assuming that he survived, there are all manner of potential problems, health issues. So I lived this. So my experience of the NICU was really defined by that 6-week period after my son was born, which was unbelievably stressful and difficult. And every day had new test results and new trauma and new possibilities, and trust me when I say, you don't want to, we've detected a cranial bleed. It might just be cerebral palsy. That's not a sentence you ever want to hear. Anyway, my son's fine. But, I was there and I saw what happened in the NICU. I saw the state of the other babies. I saw the way they develop, the way the teams work with them and such. So, and that's a very intense memory for me. So, this is, to use a modern phrase, somewhat triggering, right? If you've been through this kind of experience, this is not an easy watch all the time. It's a genuinely uplifting show throughout, but there are moments of real sadness and loss and grief. And I think if you've had any experiences with small children, particularly if you had miscarriages, are very hard to talk about and hard to respond to because you lose something that you never completely had. And things like that get dealt with in this show. And as I say, it manages to be a kind of monument to the human spirit and to a collective notion of the human spirit, a celebration of what happens when good people try their best. But it doesn't always work. So be warned that it's not all a bed of roses. But ultimately, there's an aspirational sense to the show which is really positive, and I hate to say heartwarming because that sounds so glib, but yeah, uplifting I think is better. Each story is essentially about the realities of bringing a new life into the world, with all the positive, the hope, and all the challenges that come with that, and the anxiety about doing the right thing and creating the right environment for a new person, and the sense of the colossal responsibility of everybody involved and the obligation of the society to try and do this in the best possible way. And, a lot of the stories are really quite beautiful and thoughtful, observant, well told, and with a strong emphasis on character without judgment. This is one of the things that I've seen a lot in good Japanese drama recently, that there's a kind of an attempt to empathize with all the characters and whatever they're going through in order to try to make sense of why they feel the way they feel and the burdens that they each carry, to understand those things rather than simply judging them. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say about it, but I would strongly recommend it. It's on Netflix right now, and there are 2 seasons, and again, your mileage may vary, especially insofar as these things are affected by your own personal experience and background. But I think it's actually a surprisingly good show. It's well acted across the board and raises a lot of interesting ideas and feelings. And yeah, I recommend it. That's all I'm going to say. As ever, please like, comment, subscribe, check out my Patreon page, and thank you as ever to my patrons. I recently created a new, even lower level tier, so you can donate a couple of bucks a month to help me continue to make videos like this. As I said before, this channel is not monetized, so I have no other reason to keep doing it other than to participate in a conversation with the people who watch. Check out my merchandise page, check out my books, and I will talk to you again soon. Thanks very much. Bye.